Stop turning observations into judgments. The communication habit that pushes people away. Why do people avoid some conversations, even when nothing openly hostile is said? Often, the problem is not criticism alone. It is the habit of turning every small observation into a negative conclusion about another person. Some people do not realize that they have developed a communication habit that slowly drives others away. It rarely begins with shouting. It rarely begins with an obvious insult. Instead, it often starts with something much smaller. Someone mentions that they ordered takeaway. Someone says that they feel tired. Someone explains that work has been stressful. Within seconds, another person turns that simple information into a judgment about their character. You eat takeaway because you are lazy. You are tired because you are disorganized. You only got promoted because you know the manager. These comments may feel harmless to the person saying them. They may believe that they are simply being honest, observant, or direct. However, the listener often experiences something very different. The conversation suddenly feels uncomfortable, unfair, and unsafe. People begin sharing less. They become defensive. Eventually, they may stop talking to that person altogether. This article explores where this behavior comes from, why it is so irritating, how it affects listeners, why it spreads through families and workplaces, and how it can be replaced with healthier communication. The three-step trap. Many people unknowingly follow the same mental shortcut. Instead of separating facts from assumptions, their brain combines them. Step 1. Observation. I can see several empty takeaway boxes. This is an observation. It describes something that is physically visible without explaining what it means. Step 2. Assumption. They must eat takeaway every day. The person is no longer describing what they can see. They are now creating an explanation without enough evidence. Step 3. Character judgment. They are lazy. The assumption has now become a label. A small observation has been treated as proof of someone's personality. The entire conclusion may rest on very little evidence. The boxes could have come from a family gathering, a busy work week, visiting friends, or one unusually hectic evening. However, once the judgment has been made, it may feel completely true to the person making it. Why this behavior feels so irritating. Imagine that every ordinary conversation begins to feel like an investigation. You say, "I have not been sleeping well." Instead of concern, you hear, "You spend too much time on your phone." You say, "My car needs repairing." The response is, "You never maintain anything properly." You say, "I have a headache." The response is, "You probably don't drink enough water." People begin protecting themselves. They stop giving details because every detail may be used to form another negative conclusion. The problem is not simply that they dislike criticism. It is that they dislike being repeatedly misunderstood, analyzed, and reduced to negative labels. A conversation should create understanding. When every statement becomes an opportunity for blame, the listener no longer feels heard. Why people stop wanting to be around them. People who communicate this way may eventually wonder why friends, relatives, or colleagues become distant. They may tell themselves, "People are too sensitive." However, the real problem may be that others have learned that every conversation carries an emotional risk. Sharing exciting news may lead to criticism. Sharing a problem may lead to blame. Sharing an ordinary detail may lead to a negative label. Explaining yourself may lead to further interrogation. Eventually, people begin limiting contact. They do not necessarily leave because of one dramatic argument. They leave because repeated small interactions become exhausting. This withdrawal is often a form of emotional self-protection. People naturally prefer relationships in which they can speak without having every word turned against them. The impact on listeners. Constant negative assumptions can affect listeners in several ways. They become defensive. When people expect to be judged, they begin preparing explanations before they have even finished speaking. They stop sharing personal information. Honest conversation becomes difficult when every detail may be misinterpreted. They begin doubting themselves. Repeated criticism can make people question whether ordinary mistakes or imperfections reveal something deeply wrong about them. They feel watched rather than understood. Instead of feeling that someone is listening to connect, they feel that the person is listening to collect evidence. Trust gradually disappears. Trust depends on the belief that another person will interpret us fairly. When someone repeatedly assumes the worst, that belief weakens. How the behavior spreads. Communication habits are often learned socially. People repeat patterns that they have seen, heard, or experienced many times. A child raised in a highly critical household may learn that conversations are mainly about finding mistakes. An employee working under a fault-finding manager may begin speaking to colleagues in the same way. A friendship group may normalize sarcasm, negative assumptions, and personal remarks until everyone begins expecting criticism. Over time, one person's habit can influence an entire group. People become more guarded, less open, and more likely to criticize one another. This is one reason the behavior should not be dismissed as harmless. Communication styles can spread through families, teams, and social groups, creating cultures in which fault-finding becomes normal. Where does this habit come from? There is rarely one simple cause. The behavior may develop through several psychological and social influences. Growing up around criticism. Children who frequently hear statements such as, "What have you done wrong?" or "You always make mistakes," may learn to scan constantly for faults. They may later repeat the same style without recognizing how harsh it sounds. Negativity bias. Human beings naturally pay strong attention to potential problems and threats. This tendency is known as negativity bias. However, some people become so focused on faults that they overlook neutral or positive information. They may enter a clean room and notice one dusty shelf. They may meet a thoughtful person and focus on one awkward sentence. Some people move rapidly from limited evidence to a confident explanation. They do not pause to ask whether several different explanations are possible. Fundamental attribution error. People often explain another person's behavior by blaming their personality while ignoring the situation. Dirty dishes become evidence of laziness. Being late becomes evidence of unreliability. Being quiet becomes evidence of rudeness. Messy hair becomes evidence of poor hygiene. Yet when explaining their own behavior, people are more likely to mention circumstances such as stress, tiredness, traffic, or lack of time. They give themselves context but give others labels. Confirmation bias. Once someone decides that another person is lazy, arrogant, or careless, they may begin noticing only the evidence that supports that belief. One takeaway box becomes proof. One mistake becomes a pattern. One untidy day becomes a personality. A need to feel superior. For some people, pointing out flaws provides a temporary sense of control or superiority. By focusing on someone else's weaknesses, they may avoid examining their own insecurity, mistakes, or discomfort. Anxiety and the need for certainty. Ambiguity can feel uncomfortable. Some people prefer a quick negative explanation to admitting that they do not know the full story. Labels make the world feel simple, but they often make relationships unfair. The damage they often do not see. People who make these comments may believe that they are helping. They may think, "I am only telling the truth. Someone needs to say it. I am helping them improve. I am just being observant." However, the listener may hear a very different message. "I assume the worst about you. I do not need evidence before judging you. I have already decided what kind of person you are." This is why intention does not erase impact. A person may intend to sound helpful while still sounding insulting, intrusive, or condescending. Why simply calling it honesty is not enough. Honest communication is not the same as saying every negative thought that enters your mind. Honesty still requires evidence, timing, relevance, and respect. A statement can be honest from the speaker's perspective and still be careless, unnecessary, or based on a false assumption. Mature communication asks more than, "Is this what I think?" It also asks, "Do I know this is true? Is it necessary to say? Will this help the situation? Am I describing behavior or attacking someone's character?" 5 communication habits that replace judgment. 1. Describe before interpreting. Instead of saying, "You are lazy," say, "I noticed several takeaway boxes." The first statement attacks identity. The second describes what is visible. In many situations, the most respectful choice is to stop after the observation and avoid commenting further. Ask instead of assuming. Instead of saying, "You must eat takeaway all the time," try, "It looks as though you have had a busy week. Have you had much time to cook?" Questions create space for context. Assumptions close that space immediately. 3. Separate behavior from identity. Instead of, "You are careless," say, "There are several mistakes in this report." Behavior can be discussed and changed. Identity labels feel permanent, and personal. Before speaking, ask yourself, what have I directly observed? What am I assuming? What other explanations are possible? Do I have enough evidence to say this? Is this comment necessary? If the conclusion depends mostly on guesswork, it should not be presented as a fact. Replace accusation with possibility. Instead of saying, "You never look after yourself," try, "You seem tired today. I may be wrong, but has something been keeping you busy?" This approach communicates uncertainty and gives the other person room to explain. A simple communication structure. A useful structure for avoiding unfair judgments is observe, pause, ask, understand, respond. A damaging pattern is observe, assume, label, criticize. The first structure creates understanding. The second creates defensiveness. The pause test. Before making a personal comment, pause and ask 4 simple questions. Is this an observation or an assumption? Do I know the full situation? Does this need to be said? How might this sound to the listener? This short pause can prevent an ordinary conversation from turning into an unnecessary conflict. How to help someone recognize this behavior. Telling someone that they are judgmental may cause them to become defensive. It is often more effective to point out the communication pattern. You might say, "You noticed one thing, but then you made several assumptions about what it means. When you turn a small detail into a judgment about my personality, it makes me less comfortable sharing things with you. Could you ask me what happened before deciding why it happened?" You may intend that as advice, but it sounds like criticism. These responses focus on the behavior, its impact, and the change being requested. A 3-part feedback structure. When addressing this habit, use the following structure. 1. Name the behavior. You saw the takeaway boxes and immediately assumed that I order food every day. 2. Explain the impact. That made me feel judged and misunderstood. 3. Request a better approach. Next time, please ask me what happened instead of making a conclusion. This structure is clearer and more constructive than simply saying, "You are annoying." What the person can practice. Practice neutral descriptions. Describe only what can be directly seen or heard, without adding a motive, label, or explanation. Generate 3 possible explanations. Before reaching a conclusion, think of at least 3 reasons why the situation may have happened. For example, empty takeaway boxes might mean the person had guests, they had an unusually busy week, the boxes were being collected for recycling. Replace labels with specific language. Avoid broad words such as lazy, dirty, careless, selfish, or rude, unless there is strong and relevant evidence. Practice curiosity. Use questions such as, "What happened? Has it been a busy week? Am I understanding this correctly? Would you like advice, or would you prefer me to listen?" Listen for understanding. The purpose of listening should not be to search for weaknesses. It should be to understand the speaker's meaning, experience, and needs. Why this behavior should be stopped. This communication habit should be challenged because it damages more than individual conversations. It can create reduced trust, frequent defensiveness, resentment, family conflict, workplace tension, social isolation, low psychological safety, a culture of blame. It may also prevent the person from receiving honest information. When people expect criticism, they hide mistakes, avoid asking for help, and limit what they share. The critical person may then believe that others are secretive or distant, without recognizing that their own communication helped create the distance. Why small comments matter. Most relationships do not collapse because of one dramatic sentence. They often weaken through repeated small interactions. One unfair assumption may be forgotten. A repeated pattern becomes part of the relationship. Each unnecessary judgment teaches the listener that speaking openly is risky. Over time, the person may stop explaining, stop sharing, and eventually stop engaging. The person making the comments may think that everyone has suddenly become distant. In reality, the distance may have been building quietly for a long time. How Spekero can help. People often fail to recognize this habit because speaking feels different from listening. A comment may sound reasonable inside the speaker's mind, while sounding accusatory, dismissive, or condescending to everyone else. Spekero helps users reflect on how they communicate by allowing them to record their voice, review what they said, and consider how their tone and wording may affect listeners. By listening back, Users may notice patterns such as jumping to conclusions, using personal labels, sounding overly certain, or offering criticism when curiosity would work better. Spekero's communication articles, speaking exercises, and practice tools can also help users develop a more thoughtful structure. Pause, observe, ask, understand, then respond. The goal is not to remove honesty. It is to make honesty more accurate, respectful, and useful. Practice speaking with Spekero. Final thoughts. Healthy communication begins with one simple truth. Observations are not conclusions. A takeaway box is a takeaway box. Messy hair is messy hair. Quietness is quietness. The story built around those observations may come from the observer's own assumptions, fears, upbringing, or expectations. The strongest communicators are not the people who judge fastest. They are the people who remain curious long enough to understand. No one is perfect, including people who have learned to criticize often. The habit usually does not help anyone. It can weaken confidence, make people more guarded, and create unnecessary suspicion in ordinary conversations. When someone practices looking for what is good, fair, or understandable before looking for what is wrong, the people around them may become more relaxed, happier, and more open. Small criticisms can also stay with people longer than the speaker realizes. A careless comment may become a negative voice in someone's head, especially when similar comments happen again and again. Over time, the person may start believing they are never enough, or that they must become perfect according to someone else's unrealistic standard. Breaking the habit of criticizing is not only about sounding nicer. It can help people feel safer, more accepted, and more able to be themselves. The cycle can start to change when people recognize that this habit is not helpful, that it can leave lasting hurt, and that repeated criticism may become part of someone's life struggle.